guys, it's been a while since I've done one of these, so I thought I'd give you all a bit of an update on how the truck's progressing. Yeah, well, as you can see in the background here, we've been making some good progress. Got all the shocks in. We're actually up to, we're starting to wire. So got our Smartwire all mounted up in here. Our Racepak Smartwire. We started to run the cabling for that. The Smartwire, which is a PDM, which for those that don't know what that is, it's it basically replaces your fuse box that traditional cars would be running, and it's a solid state switching device. And in this particular one, it's got 30 channels, 30 output channels. 20 are good for 10 amps each, and 10 are good for 20 amps each. You can parallel those channels up, so you can take two 20 amp channels and parallel them to make it a 40 amp channel, and then you can do the same with the 10 amp channels. You've got to make sure that you do use the same channel. You can't use a 10 and a 20. You've got to use two 10s or two 20s. But yeah, quite a bit of room to move there. And then I think there's 12 inputs. 12 inputs, not including the inputs you can put in via CAN. So there is a CAN bus system, which again, if you don't know what CAN is, it's basically a communication protocol, similar to your computer where you have Ethernet. CAN is just a system that a lot of motor vehicles use. So in our case, if I turn you around and we'll have a look just up here. So you can see up here got the switch panel there on the roof. It's a 8 switch panel, 7 toggles and 1 push button, and you can see there's a single cable that connects in there. Now that cable runs along the roof line here and then down into the oh, my horrible filming, down into the Smartwire. Racepak call it a VNet system, but it's basically a type of CAN bus. Now the beauty with CAN bus is you can daisy chain different things off that same cable. So like I said, there's 12 inputs on that Smartwire, but that does not include anything coming in via CAN. So in my case, I've got the 8 switch panel mounted up there on the roof. So we've got 12 plus the 8, so that gives us 20. And I know for sure you can have at least one more switch panel daisy chained into that. So potentially you could have another 8 inputs on top of that 20, so you could have 28 inputs. But in theory you should be able to go more than that, but I've got a feeling that maybe Racepak, that's its limitation. So you also connect the Smartwire to your ECU via the CAN system. Depending on your ECU, you might need to buy a VNet UFI universal adapter. In any case, that then will help, will allow your ECU to send signals, whether they be inputs, outputs, commands, whatever you want to call it, to the Smartwire to tell it to turn things on and off. And that will be via CAN as well. And again, those signals, whether they be inputs or outputs or just commands, that's also not included in that 28 inputs that you've got. So there's quite a bit of versatility there. And then obviously Racepak have their own proprietary VNet system. So if you want to buy all the VNet sensors and whatnot, it can obviously use all of them as well as feedback for turning things on and off. I'm not going down that route. So yeah, basically the Smartwire is like those 30 channels, just so in case I don't think I've been very clear. So those 30 channels, each channel, if you think of it like an individual relay, just like you'd have a relay that switches on your spotlights, usually you have a switch in the car which then switches the relay on, which then turns the lights on. And the reason why we have the relay switching is so that relay can switch a much higher load than, say, a normal switch which you might have in the car. Not to mention, it means you don't have to run heavy gauge cable to all your switches in the car, because maybe you do have a switch capable of switching, say, 20 amps at a time. But yeah, so that relay gives you the benefit of switching a high load using a light gauge cable via a switch from inside the cab, and with the Smartwire, all of that is a solid state relay, so no moving parts, very reliable, and then it's all programmable, which is great. So each channel you can tell it to be, and it's all internally fused, but it's programmable. So instead of having your standard relay setup where you'll have relay, which will have there'll be a fuse and a relay, and you'll have to decide what size fuse you want to run and go and get, say you're running a set of spotlights, you'll have your 20 amp fuse in there, and then it'll go through the 20 amp fuse through your relay. Your relay will be switched by your switch in the car. You turn your switch on, lights come on as long as the fuse is good. Now, with this, you just program the Smartwire, and say if you want a 20 amp output, you just go, hey, I want this one to be 20 amps. Now, for those that race and run massive 16-inch thermofans, you'll know that on startup they can draw nearly 60 amps, which is a lot. And usually you'll only have them sitting on a 30 amp fuse. And quite often, or not, when you're in a race situation, those fans are cutting in and out, and the duty cycle of the fuse can give up the ghost, and in the middle of a race, because of the high inrush current, your fuse can pop, and that can be a real pain depending on how you wired up your car. If you're running a auto circuit breaker, then that's one way of doing it. But if you're running a manual circuit breaker or a manual fuse, and you haven't got that fuse in a spot where you can reach while you're strapped in, you're kind of stuffed. You're going to have to pull over and fix that fuse before you keep racing, because you're going to cook your motor. One of the cool things about the Smartwire is being able to program it. You can also program how many times it trips and how many times it will auto reset. So you can say when the fans come on, if it trips, say 5 times, each time reset it after a period of time. Maybe like after 3 seconds we'll reset it. And if that happens more than 5 times, you can say, nah, there must be a real fault there, and now output a fault code to, say, your dash or a light on your dash, something like that. So then hey, there's a problem. I'm going to have to pull over and have a look at that. So that's one really cool thing about having the PDM. Just about all PDMs on the market will have that functionality. You know, another thing is, because we're basically controlling everything in the truck via the PDM. Well, everything is getting fed via the PDM. It's mostly getting controlled via the ECU. But you can write rules in, like when you go to start the truck, things like front headlights, things like your lights and things that have to be on when you're racing. You can say don't turn them on until you have, say, 1,000 RPM. So if the RPM is less than 1,000, then have all the lights off. If your engine's off, that means your RPM's going to be under 1,000. So then if your RPM's under 1,000, then all the lights are going to be off, which means that when you go and start your car, you're starting your car with less things drawing current while the car's not running. So you can set up a whole lot of different rules like that. There's lots of stuff you can do, you know. Obviously, what's something else we could do? I can't think of anything on the top of my head, but there's heaps of stuff. There is limitations on the smart wires, which is why you'll see some people running more than one. So even though you've got those 30 channels, and if you do the math correctly, you end up with a maximum of 300 amps there. Well, I can tell you that the PDM does not allow you to run 300 amps at one time. The Smartwire Racepak one lets you do 125 amps at one time. So although you've got the capacity to switch 300, you can only be pulling 125 amps at any one time. So because of that reason, I've gone down the path of using a MSD solid state relay, which how can I turn this around? So down here, this is a MSD solid state relay in here. Again, solid state, no moving parts. It's not as smart as a Smartwire. However, we're going to use the Smartwire to control it. So this particular one is a 4-channel solid state relay. It's 20 amps per channel. I am using this to power our thermo fans on the rear. So 20 amps, and we're going to parallel them up, so we're going to give the fans 40 amps each. I can't quite see the oh, here they are. I think I'm going to give them 40 amps each, and I'm going to switch it via the Smartwire. So the Smartwire is going to send out a output, which will be very, very small, which won't really go against my 125 amp capacity limit, and it's going to tell it to switch on or off. And then this particular MSD also has the ability to reset, and the way it resets is by cycling the power on it. So I'm going to do something a little bit tricky, and I'm also going to wire in 2 feedback cables or wires from the output of the relay, so that from the side that's actually feeding the fans, I'm going to run 2 feedback wires back to the Smartwire, and I'm going to monitor those wires, and I'm going to write a rule which says that if these wires go low, or if they turn off or show that there's no voltage, which means that for some reason or another we've tripped the protection inside this solid state relay, if they go low, cycle or toggle the switching cable, which is also coming from the Smartwire. And what that will do, that will basically put the MSD into a reboot, and then hopefully it will come back on, all powered up again. So all automatically. And all this will happen while we're driving, and we probably won't even know it happens. So yeah, bit tricky, bit something out of the box, but we're going to do that to save some capacity on the Smartwire, and still stick with the solid state relay and keep the reliability. So yeah, so that's what we're doing with that. So that one relay is just for the 2 thermofans on the back. There is a lot of wiring to go into this car. I've done a bit of a mud map in here. We'll have a bit of a look. It's not really properly drawn, but basically, if I we'll have a look. So there's 4 main components. We've got our dash, the switch panel, the Smartwire, and the ECU. These are all connected via a CAN bus system, or a communication system which allows them all to talk to each other. Then via the Smartwire does all the switching. Does the switching for our transmission fans, our engine, our power steering, our 2 main thermofans for the radiator, our main fuel pumps, our lift pumps, and then the other thing this whole system has is we're running a Cartec solid state isolator rather than the old school full current isolators. I think I've got one in here. Here's a very old one, which you'll know what I'm talking about. So there's a full current isolator, right? Not one that could handle the current we're asking, but one nonetheless. So usually you would have one of them in the middle of the dash somewhere where both you and the navigator can reach it, and also one either outside, or you'll have a ripcord to outside. The downside to that is you need to run full gauge heavy cabling from your battery all the way to that isolator, because you'll be you need to do that to break that circuit. It means you're running a lot of extra heavy gauge cabling. In our instance, by having the solid state unit, we can mount it right next to the battery, and it's pretty clever. It has 2 little push buttons which act as your isolators. Ones are normally open. I'll show you where it is. I haven't wired it up just yet. Spin this around. So it's actually mounted in behind here, in behind this shock. So let's see how we go. Oh, my camera thing is playing up, but that's it there. You can see those are really small light gauge cables. They're to hook up and connect to the the push buttons, which actually isolate the car. So, and like I was saying, one's actually a normally open, one's a normally closed. The normally closed one goes on the outside of the car, and the reason for that is in an accident, if you're in a big enough crash and you rip a panel off or you smash that side of the car up, obviously it's going to rip that button off, and because it's normally closed, if that rips off, it's going to break the cable, which means it's going to go open circuit, which means it's automatically going to shut down the system. The one on the inside of the car is a normally open, and it's looking for a closed signal. So if you or the navigator push the button inside the car, it will also shut down the system. It's a pretty cool system. Very lightweight, a little bit expensive. Yeah, it would be much better if I had the battery mounted at the front of the car, but for weight reasons I've put the battery at the back, so I still actually have to run a fairly hefty cable to the front of the car for the starter motor, but at least I don't have to run one through the cab to the isolators. So there is a bit of a weight saving to have there. It's also nice to use the latest tech. But yeah, so lots of wiring happening. We've got yeah, loads of heat shrinking going on. Got all of my cable scheduling here, and that's just for the Smartwire. There's a fair bit to do. You can see why people pay a lot of money to get things wired. It's not the funnest job, but it's also not that hard if you sit down and do a bit of planning and you know exactly what everything's doing. So with that, I think I'll finish it up there. Thanks for staying tuned for all this time. It's been a bit of a long one. If you want to know anything else about any of the Racepak gear that we're running, or ECU, or anything about the truck, or anything to do with the fabrication, write a comment, let us know. Make sure you click that follow button, and most importantly, click the little bell and make sure you're getting the notifications so you see when the videos are coming out. I've been a bit slack, like I said. I've got to really start putting a few more of these out. I have been taking a lot of footage. I do have to just sit down and do a lot of editing. I've got I will be putting out like a time lapse of the entire build of the truck shortly. But yeah, like always, thanks for following us. Support the people that support us, and we'll see you next time. Cheers, guys.